Hello art lovers and welcome back to my studio. In today's video we'll be talking about how I took this commission from rough concept to full painting. I actually started this project at the beginning of August and I just really wanted to take my time making sure that all of the details were as perfect as I could get them, which is why just the digital render took me about 36 hours to complete. But I'm really happy with the way the line art turned out and just this piece overall. Now, the very first thing I did for this piece was actually prep the frame. I used this multi-surface acrylic pearlescent paint in lavender. The buyer mentioned that this would be a birthday gift for her daughter Alicia, and her favorite color is purple, so I thought lavender would work best and it wouldn't pull too much away from the art piece itself. I also like that this sponging effect that I used was able to create a good amount of texture, which made it look totally different from any other frame that I saw in the store. Next up, I masked off the characters and taped the page down so that way the paper wouldn't buckle. Then I prepared the background using Dr. P.H. Martin's India inks in blue, teal, and green. I find using the India inks is really great for this effect because I can create a beautiful, very washy background, and there's no chance of it getting disturbed or reactivated once it's dry. As always, I will place all of my supplies and tools in the description box. If you have any questions on how to recreate some of these design elements, just feel free to leave a comment below. And I'm not sure if it was the amount of water that I was using or the way that I had the paper taped down in a way that let me paint all the way to the edges of the page, but I noticed the border of the paper was becoming overly saturated with the pigments. For whatever reason, it was just really soaking it up, and it was around the whole edge of the paper. So up next, you'll see how I go in and fix it. This is when I pull out my trusty Acryla-Gouache, which very often saves the day. It is completely opaque and another medium that will not reactivate with water. For this, I use the colors sky blue, ultramarine blue, light green, and white. Next up, I lay in the shadows for all of the characters using the blue India ink. Again, I use the India ink because it's not something that will reactivate, and I can lay as much watercolor as I want on top without losing that depth. I know it's much more common for people to say work from light to dark, especially when you're using watercolor. But since my style has become much more mixed media, it means that I can kind of create my own path and use lots of different materials to my benefit. Another important thing to keep in mind when working with watercolor is knowing how much water your paper can take. Especially working with darker skin, it's always important to work with thin, smooth layers, but if you go too thin and there's not enough pigment, then you'll never get the saturation that you're looking for. So it's kind of about having a balance. What really helped me out was outlining her skin using a Prismacolor brown fine liner, and that helped to remind me what depth I needed to bring the skin up to. But I did also notice that it wasn't waterproof, so it did leak a little bit, which I'm able to fix later on. As far as most of the rest of the outline, I'm actually using a Micron purple pen, which is waterproof, and there's no issues with bleeding in that case. Now, speaking of watercolor, I used two different brands. My standard Winsor & Newton watercolor palette I used for the browns and yellows and a little bit of teal in her top. And then any of the pinks and purples, I used the Blick liquid watercolors. I've used the Blick liquid watercolors a bunch in the past, and I really just love them for their vibrancy. They are so saturated with color beyond anything that I've been able to blend together with Winsor & Newton colors. So I knew with her favorite color being purple, I had to give her a bright, almost iridescent purple tail that had highlights of pink and white, and I was just really satisfied with the result. One thing I should note about the Blick watercolor is you can see there that I accidentally dripped some water on the page and it lifted a little spot there in her hair. The Blick colors are super saturated, but they lift just as easily. So you have to be careful when you're working. Keeping that in mind, I actually use it to my advantage when working on her scales. I added little just clear water droplets on her scales to add a little bit of texture and some more highlights. From here on, the watercolor process is pretty straightforward. I remember to work in layers, drawing in between, and just remember to be patient. This piece took really long, and I enjoyed every minute of it. It was a little bit of a challenge, remembering to keep in mind all of the different transparencies, and at some point I even had to go in with a little bit of the Winsor & Newton masking fluid to recover some of the bubbles and some of the streaky lines. But all of the work was definitely worth it, and I can definitely see myself improving with each piece. It used to be really hard for me to even think of ideas for mermaids, and I find myself enjoying mermaid paintings more and more, so I can't wait to continue them. Oh, this is the part where I was talking about. I started off with just adding clean little droplets of water, and then I moved into like little pale pink droplets and then pale purple droplets, and it either took away or added a little bit of the tone in the tail to accentuate the scales. Now, the second major element of this painting was all of Alicia's fishy companions, each one representing different pets. The first one here that I'm working on is Riley, rendered as a dogfish, which I found out is actually a shark. This puppy was pretty much all white, which can be a little bit difficult to render, but I did so by adding pink in kind of the areas that you would find pink on a puppy, kind of in the nose and the tips of the toes, or the tips of the fins in this case, and a bit of yellow to give life to the skin. The second puppy I've actually had the pleasure of meeting. He's very playful and wants all the attention, as all good puppies should. His name is Jax, and he is kind of a mixture of like chocolate brown and kind of a almost tan, like a golden brown. So he's represented as the second dogfish. While looking for references and doing a bit of research, I found out that these sharks actually hunt in packs, which is, I'm guessing, why they're referred to as dogfish. But they can also grow to be almost 5 feet tall, a little over 5 feet tall actually, which I found interesting because both of the dogs that I'm representing here are pretty big dogs. I think on their hind legs both could easily stand the same height as me. The last pet to include here would be Isis the cat, who I've rendered here as a lionfish. She was probably the hardest part of this whole painting. I think just because of the way lionfish fins are transparent. I initially started by outlining her in pencil, but you really couldn't see it with the watercolor, so I went in with pen, but I just didn't want to make it too dark because this fish has kind of a very ethereal aesthetic to it, and I didn't want to take away from that by adding super thick line art. And finally, no painting is complete without a little bit of Coliro metallic watercolors. For this painting, I used a couple of different golds as well as silver and a lilac color. I also went in with a little bit of oil pastel and white ink to accentuate kind of that stream, to make Jax and Riley look like they're kind of chasing each other around Alicia as she holds Isis above all of the commotion. And I had hoped to keep it a little subtle, but I also added a little white halo around Isis and Riley because these two pets have actually passed away. But I wanted it to look like they were all back together again, happy and having fun. And if you're watching this and wondering why the music isn't a little bit more tropical, that is because I found out that Alicia is actually learning how to play the drums. And since I wasn't really able to incorporate that into the illustration, I hope that the background music would inspire her to keep practicing so that one day we can all listen to her very own drum solo. Now that we've reached the end, I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. Check out Isis, Jax, and Riley coming up. If you haven't already done so, remember to comment, like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications on my next videos. And I want to say a big happy 8th birthday to Alicia. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to see you all in the next one. Bye!